Advisory. Some episodes of the 1836 podcast are not intended for all audiences, due to details that might be considered disturbing. Listener and viewer discretion is advised.
On this episode of the 1836 podcast, Mark Allen Smith, Mountain Home serial killer. Mark Allen Smith was born on June 27, 1949 in Chicago, Illinois. His parents' separation when he was just a toddler led to his mother gaining sole custody, which cast a shadow over his future life. When Mark was 7, his mother remarried, and the family moved to McHenry County, Illinois. As Mark grew older, he was plagued by anger and a growing sense of isolation that drove him back to the chaotic streets of Chicago. His educational journey began at Edgebrook Public School, where his dark tendencies began to surface early, when he attempted to strangle a female classmate. A year later, the horror escalated when he stabbed a 6-year-old playmate over 20 times with a penknife. Miraculously, the boy survived, and Smith found himself under the watchful eye of a psychiatrist. After completing his high school education, Mark enlisted in the United States Army during the Vietnam War in 1966. Stationed in West Germany, his military service quickly spiraled into violence. In 1967, he was court-martialed for assaulting 4 fellow soldiers. This early glimpse into his troubled psyche foreshadowed the brutality to come. Upon returning to civilian life, Mark dabbled in various jobs, taking on roles as a handyman and laborer. However, his sinister presence soon found its way to Mountain Home, Arkansas. As Mountain Home grew, the Baxter County Courthouse remained steadfast, quietly bearing witness to the tragedy that would soon befall. On December 3, 1969, during a festive holiday season, Obie Faye Ash vanished while running errands, leaving her husband Lonnie frantic. His desperate calls to friends and family yielded no answers, prompting him to report her disappearance to the authorities at around 6:30 p.m. Obie, who was 32 years old at the time, had last been seen wearing an orange and green mini dress and a faux fur coat, driving her dark green 1957 Volkswagen. The police bulletin aired on local radio, a chilling reminder of her disappearance. That night, James Ryan, listening to the news on the radio, spotted her car parked at the Baxter Furniture Company, just 2 blocks from the Baxter County Courthouse. His tip led Deputy Sheriff William LaFoon to the scene, where a harrowing discovery would plunge the community into despair. As mentioned earlier, Mark Smith's violent history began to surface in the late 1960s, during his service in the United States Army, when he was court-martialed for assaulting 4 fellow soldiers. Upon his return to the United States, his violent tendencies not only followed him, but escalated. Smith relocated to Mountain Home, Arkansas, where he worked as a handyman at a local TV repair shop. On December 3, 1969, during a festive holiday season, Smith encountered Obie Faye Ash, a mother of 3 from Cotter, Arkansas, in the store where he worked. What began as a mundane meeting morphed into a chilling event that would shatter lives. Later this evening, Ash's body was discovered bound with wire and abandoned her in the back seat of her car, which he left parked on South Main Street. Mark Smith had kidnapped and strangled the 32-year-old Ash. Her body, showing 13 stab wounds and signs of rape, sent shockwaves through the community, leaving behind 3 grieving children. As investigators scrambled to find Ash's killer, the town was gripped by fear. Local law enforcement, including the Arkansas State Police and the FBI, worked tirelessly, collecting hundreds of witness statements and sending evidence for analysis. Despite Smith's efforts to wipe the car clean of fingerprints, the investigation pressed on. Sheriff Don C. Cockrum set up checkpoints to trace Obie Faye Ash's final movements and bring her killer to justice. Smith had left the area. But in early 1970, his killing spree shifted to McHenry County, Illinois, where he continued his reign of terror. On January 27, 1970, 27-year-old Jane Bianchi, a mother of 2, was last seen at a laundromat. Days later, her body was found in a frozen creek brutally beaten, stabbed 17 times, and raped. Her family, devastated by the tragedy, pleaded for justice, intensifying the hunt for Smith. A month later, on February 27, 1970, Smith attacked 22-year-old chemist Janice Bolyard after she rejected his advances. He raped her, choked her, and strangled her with her own pantyhose. When her fiancé reported her missing, her body was discovered, adding another horrific crime to Smith's record. Smith's terror reached its peak with the murder of 17-year-old honors student Jean Ann Lingenfelter on May 27, 1970. He lured her into his car, raped her, and strangled her, disposing of her body in McCollum Lake. In a disturbing confession, Smith revealed that he had inserted a beer bottle into her body before leaving her to die. And shockingly, he also admitted to joining the search parties for Lingenfelter. Smith was even linked to the high-profile 1966 murder of Valerie Percy, though no charges were filed. When asked about his actions, he chillingly remarked, "Everybody has got to die sometime," underscoring his horrifying indifference. Smith was ultimately convicted for the rapes and murders of Jean Bianchi, Janice Bolyard, and Jean Ann Lingenfelter. His confession and the grotesque nature of his crimes shocked investigators and the community alike. His brutality continued to surface as he admitted to additional murders, including allegations of killing young women during his military service in West Germany in 1969. Although these crimes were never prosecuted. While some of his confessions were later recanted, investigations into his earlier murders, both in and out of the military, revealed a disturbing pattern of violence. Authorities suspected his total number of victims could exceed 20, spanning multiple states and countries, though many cases remained unprosecuted. Smith's reign of terror ended with his conviction, but the scars left on the victims' families and the community persist to this day. In the early 1970s, Mark Allen Smith was arrested and eventually convicted for the brutal slayings, narrowly escaping the death penalty. Ultimately, he was sentenced to 500 years in prison for the murders. Throughout his time in prison, Smith co-authored a book titled Legally Sane with his defense attorney, in which he confessed to the murders he had committed in Germany while serving in the military. His life behind bars was marked by multiple incidents and legal battles. On April 27, 1977, Smith made a daring attempt to escape from Pontiac Correctional Center by trying to break through the facility's boiler room. His plan failed, and the botched escape added 18 more years to his already extensive sentence. Despite being incarcerated, his eligibility for parole began haunting the families of his victims, as sentencing laws at the time allowed inmates to be considered for parole after serving 20 years. In 2005, Smith made his 10th attempt at parole, which was promptly denied. 3 years later, in 2008, Nicole Owens, a passionate advocate for the victims, delivered an emotional appeal to the parole board, ensuring that Smith's release was once again rejected. This decision provided the victims' families a brief respite, with the next parole hearing delayed for another 3 years. By June 18, 2024, tensions mounted as the Illinois Prison Review Board once again faced Smith's eligibility for parole. Detective Rafael Tovar and prosecutor Roskushka voiced their strong opposition, and public debate and fear resurfaced as Smith's potential release loomed. On August 21, 2024, the McHenry County State's Attorney's Office held an objection hearing. Victims' families, still scarred by the traumatic events of the 1970s, delivered heartbreaking testimonies, urging the parole board to deny Smith's release once more. The parole board ultimately ruled against Smith, extending the waiting period for another 5 years.
A convicted serial killer from McHenry County will not be getting his freedom. The Illinois Prisoner Review Board denied Mark Allen Smith's request for parole. He was convicted for the murders of 2 young women and a teenager in McHenry County in 1970. He was also convicted of killing a woman in Arkansas and confessed to killing 8 others while stationed in Germany in the 1960s. He's currently serving a 500-year sentence for the 3 murders and is currently 75 years old. The parole board denied his previous request to be released back in 2019.
As of this episode, Mark Allen Smith remains incarcerated at Pontiac Correctional Center, where he continues to serve his sentence. Should he ever be released, he still faces potential extradition to Arkansas to serve a life sentence for the murder of Obie Ash. Smith's evil legacy is a chilling tale of violence, loss, and the unrelenting pursuit of justice by those he harmed.